winter of our lives can come in the form of pain, suffering, and the most serious death. And it is this that I wish for us to look upon today, as we have been preparing through our journey of birth, of celebration, of creativity, of harmony. Now it is time perhaps to look at the most difficult part of the existence that all of us have, the existence of suffering. How do we react in the face of suffering? I hope today to give you some suggestions so that when it comes upon your doorstep, all of the tools that you have inside of you can be enhanced, can be deepened, so that you will be able to go more smoothly through these rough waves in the ocean that is sometimes a torment, sometimes a storm. For those of you who have been on the path for a long time, you will know that you have more strength inside. But still sometimes life and the divine manifestation inside of life has the possibility to make us lose our center, and we become a little movidos. We move like on a ship in the middle of this storm. What alternatives do we have when the winter, in the form of these three different sufferings, comes into our lives? We can ignore it. We can just pretend that these things are not happening. We can pretend that in reality, nothing will affect us, that we are impervious to this experience, that we are strong, and this experience doesn't have the right to affect us. We can choose to ignore this suffering. And what happens to us when we choose to ignore it? It goes down, deep inside, into our subconscious being. We push it down inside, and indeed when more difficult events come, we push that deep down inside, and we push it all deep down inside until one day we realize that our anxiety has nothing to do with the present moment, but in fact it has to do with all that has passed along the way. Like the river passing under a bridge. We are this bridge, and the river that passes under us, we must see what is inside. We must know what is inside of us. Our second alternative, of course, is simply to reject the pain, the suffering, or the death. To reject it. Because, well, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with me. Again, I'm strong, I'm impervious. And as we reject this, we seek pleasure, because that's the easiest way to reject the difficulties, the unnatural movements in the manifestation of life. We reject it and we enter into the pleasures of life, and we have short-term pleasures, short-term experiences, and what happens is we forget somehow. We reject and we forget. But what we must realize again is that deep down inside of us, in the caverns of the subconscious of us, is lying these experiences. The mind may continue, but the emotional being becomes full. We may become a different person, but the emotional being in us has not reconciled this event. Somehow we look for all kinds of experiences, extreme sports, extreme experience, because we want to feel, because we've closed off the emotional being so much. We refuse to look inside. We've thrown away the key to to the emotional being. So we look to find a way to feel again as we are rejecting this pain. I propose tonight that we must accept these winters. Not because I look for the masochist path in life, no. In fact, the opposite. If we can avoid a difficult situation, if we can find harmony in the face of difficulty, then we must do so. But what happens if there is an event that is not going to change? If there is an event that we cannot change, that continues to be there, our only resolution then is to accept and to find a way of integrating this experience in our lives. As we accept this experience, what happens? We take responsibility for what is going on. We take a mature stance on the drama that we are experiencing. It was the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl who experienced many years in the concentration camps in the Second World War, who found even in this tremendous place of death, of suffering, of horror, the worst that we can imagine as human beings, he found meaning in that place. So I propose to you that it is possible to find meaning in the middle of a great darkness. What did he say about this experience? And this experience, in many ways, as he survived this, was the foundation for many beautiful realizations that he had. He said that in the face of suffering that you have no capability of changing, you have to go inside, number one. You have to face a part of yourself and accept that the suffering is real. That you have no power to change what is going on. And then he said, when you accept this, there is a magical component of our being that manages to create a response. Perhaps a response that we were not able or that was not existent in our being before. He said that we can realize a maturity of our being, a responsibility, and we stop saying, why did this happen to me? And we say, for what reason did this happen to me? For what reason did this happen to me? We stop saying to ourselves, I'm going to escape this experience. And he said, we start to say, I am going to find a meaning out of this experience. And that's exactly what he did. I propose tonight that every moment of suffering is potentially the opportunity to find a deeper evolution, a deeper aspect, a deeper reality inside of us. So how are we going to do this? How does this play a part in the great metaphysical map if we accept that this is divine reality, if we accept that there is a great intelligence inside of everything, every atom, every breath, every movement, every reality. If we accept this, how does this affect us on the path? How does this affect us on the path? How does this help us to see this divine reality in the face of suffering? In the beginning of these conferences, I had spoken to you about my experiences 20 years ago in the Himalaya mountains with my spiritual teacher. And I spoke to you about my process, the birthing process, the transformation process. And now I'm going to use a very painful experience in my life as the opportunity to express this teaching, and that is the death of my spiritual teacher, Brahmananda Deva. I've never spoken about this in public before, but I wish to use this experience to show you my internal process in the hopes that this can serve you with your internal process. Deva, as many of you knew him, was a great warrior. And not only in his stature, but in his personality. He always, in every situation, was not afraid to accept and confront the situation. And it was in his teachings for 15 years that I was by his side, his teachings of showing me these ways and methods that I was able to live through this experience. He told me we must be able to meet pain. We must be able to have a meeting, create a meeting, a bridge between ourselves and this suffering. 2, we must be able to conquer this pain or suffering. 3, finally, we must transcend and make a contact with what is celestial, divine, sacred to us. I recall 18 years ago, in Bangalore I was living, which is in the south of India, and we had been given a farm outside of the city, and we lived there, and every day Deva would take us, we would go together, on a journey that took us an hour and a half to go into the city. And why did he do this? Because every day he wanted to go to the city to help people. And we would go to help people in the hospitals, people who lived on the street, to help people who were interested in the spiritual, to heal them. And every day we would go to the city. He had such great strength and a great will to create all of these activities. I was by his side, and I realized that this life was so important because, as I have spoken to you about, it's a life of service. And in our life, like in everybody's lives, there were difficulties. There were logistical difficulties. There were the difficulties of an economic nature. There were things that were not easy for us. And then again, there were the sufferings and difficulties of the other people. This has been a constant reality for me, a beautiful reality for me, is a possibility to see how one can ride through the storm of one's own difficulties and also the difficulties of others. I saw how he helped people, so many people, with their psychological, emotional, mental, spiritual problems. And also, he helped me when I was in the process of my deconstruction of my old personality, my terrenal, the personality of my past, and the recreation of my new personality. He would tell me, to be able to transform, we must be able to meet with the pain that lies in the emotional being. If we never make this meeting, the transformation will not be complete. As I have told you, this process is not an easy one. It's not easy because we believe in our conscious, intellectual, rational being that it's not necessary. Why do we have to go back to these difficult times? Sometimes we're not even aware of these emotions deep inside the subconscious of us. But in many ways, after these 2 years of studying with him, of seeing the proof in the pudding of my transformation, I realized that what he was saying to me was true. And as he was deconstructing, trying to help me to have accessibility to my ego consciousness, to go back, he led me to places inside of myself where emotionally I still had great sadness. And it was wonderful because I was able to touch these painful places of myself, and the tears would come out, and the tears would flood, and I would feel a relief. I would feel as if I was healing. There was someone in front of me who was taking me by the hand with kindness, compassion, telling me it was all right, that this was the purpose. But the interesting thing is that as I was receiving this attention and this care and compassion, I started to mutate into what he called the poor me syndrome. I have suffered. I'm in pain. And indeed it was true. But we must be very careful, and I had to be careful, and he guided me, how we must enter into the emotional pain. We must release the emotional pain, but we must be very careful not to transgress, to move into the poor me syndrome, which is the ego's obsession with itself. The contact with the pain. The contact with the pain is the first step. The contact with the pain is extremely important. Our ego is the mutation, the result of this original pain. The ego is the bar. It helps us until we no longer need it. So in this process now of going through the path of healing and trying and actualizing the reality of going beyond the suffering, the contact with the emotional being is extremely important, even back to the most early days that you can recall. It all has to come out. It has to come out. How do we conquer the being then? Here we are, we're open, the emotions have been released. How do we conquer the being? What is the next step? How do we then make the transition from the emotional being? We must go into the mental being. Deva then guided me to go back to the disciplines. Now is time to center the mind. Now is the time to find the peace. Now is time to invite the calmness again. Invite the calmness in. Concentrate with the divine light. Feel again your contact with the inner spirit self. The mantra, the meditation, the breathing. For me, all of these tools were extremely important in this dance of the transformation, of the suffering. I was then able to revisit this experience of the past, but my emotions had been neutralized. It was from the position of the mind that I was able to view the past with a clear mind. With a clear mind, I was able to visit the past. I was able to use what we've been calling pratyahara, the observation of the self, to see it in many ways as an old movie, the old movie of my life that was of the past. Here I was in the present, observing the old movie of the past. And by sitting in the mind, the vision of the whole being had become clarified. I realized, under Deva's guidance, that I had to create a maturity within myself to take responsibility, that I was no longer allowed in some ways, or I didn't want to allow myself to fall back. But you know, sometimes it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the emotional being, like the waves rolling up on the shore, starts appearing again and appearing again. I would get frustrated. Be patient, he told me. Perseverance and patience in all aspects of this spiritual path are very essential. Be patient with yourself. Go back inside of yourself. Choose where you want to place your consciousness. And that's what I did. So, from bringing my view, in some ways, I had become more clear. And then from there, it was necessary to enter into the elevation of the spirit. What does this mean? It means that we can have the concept is a movement of ascension, a movement upwards. We have been speaking about the individual self, the self in the world, and the transcendent self. Our spiritual self connected to the transcendent spiritual reality. There has to be an upward movement. An upward movement in the sense of the mind is looking upwards. It's not necessary that you go out of your body or you have a great psychic explosion, but it is necessary that you are able to have a vestige point that is high above you. All well and good if you're able to produce an ascension in yourself. This is positive because this is one of the deepest ways that we connect with the divine reality. Of course, there is the inward divine connection, the wideness of the divine connection, the oneness with all that is, and then there is an ascension. How does this help us? It helps us to see with an eye inside of ourselves that is more universal, more peaceful, and more wise. The ascension of the self.